I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm Dean Detloff. I'm a PhD student at the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto.
And I'm Matt Bernico. I teach media studies at Greenville University in Greenville, Illinois.
This week we are talking with John Thornton Jr., carrying on a New Year's tradition, 2 years running so far. We're going to work out a bunch of stuff about how we should name this year, 2019, and also talk about some stuff that John really did last year in 2018, specifically a really neat article that he wrote about debt. Also, final note, this is the last notice I'll give, and I'll quit bothering everyone about it, but the class that I'm teaching, called Organized Religion, Christianity, and Anti-Capitalism in the U.S., starts next week. So this will come out on Friday, and we'll have like an online lecture in the following week. You can still actually register for it even through the next week, but you have to email academic-registrar@icscanada.edu. It's all online. You can audit it if you're afraid of doing homework, and that's totally fine. I am too. It costs $67 American and $90 Canadian. And you can also feel free to DM me or email me if you have any other questions.
Cool. So let's follow suit here and really do it with John Thornton.
This week we're talking with John Thornton Jr., who's our local resident youth pastor here at the Magnificast. You might remember John from a year ago, almost exactly, when we talked with him at the beginning of 2018, and we took a page out of the My Brother, and Me handbook back then to try to name the year, to set a tone, set a theme, and we're going to do that again shortly. But last year, 2018, was 20 Imagine 18, subtitled, captioned, Really Doing It. So this year, John's back. He's going to help us get back on track in 2019, talk about some stuff that he really did last year, and we're pretty excited to have you. So, John, how's the year starting out for you?
It's been great. 2018 really did it. That was the theme. I had a couple goals for the year. One, become an uncle. Did that.
Nice.
Two, have writing published at some publications that I was really proud of. Did that. And the other was not burn out at my job. And you know what? 2 out of 3 is not bad.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, pumped to be back talking to you guys. I was literally thinking while we were talking about recording what the theme for this year would be. And I don't have it yet. So I think it's just going to have to emerge.
Yeah, we're going to do a little bit of spitballing here.
Yeah, we'll get it figured out. But no, 2019's off to a pretty good start.
Was there a particular link last year between 20 Imagine 18 and really doing it? Like, were we imagining a better future or something? Is that what we were doing? I don't even remember.
Yeah, we probably should have listened to it, eh?
Oh, no way. Not going back that far.
Matt, what have you been up to at the start of this new year?
I visited some family in Omaha, Nebraska. That was a real trip. That place, the entire place, it's all just beige. It's all one big beige blob on the map. But while I was there, I did get the new Saladin Ahmed Spider-Man, and that was pretty good. So, nice. Great start to 2019. A very Spider-Man 2019.
Into the Spider-Verse.
Yeah, there we go. Dean, what are you doing?
I went to Michigan over Christmas, and it was a pretty good time. And I've been spending the last few days at work trying to think of a resolution for this year. I told Emily that I was going to try to be more positive, and she like immediately laughed at me as like a complete reaction, like totally unprompted. So I don't know. I've kind of already given that up, I think. So I'm adrift in a sea of failed resolutions at this point.
Yeah.
Well, we are 48 hours in, so that's
yeah, that's so many hours though. It's 48 of them.
Yeah, when you put it that way, that's
48 hours lost. Well, I guess that is also all the more reason why we really have to buckle down, figure out how to name this year. Maybe a resolution will also emerge. All right, John, you've been thinking about this for a while, and you're a youth pastor, so naturally you're a professional at all things pun related, all things illustrative, metaphor related. What can we do here? How can we get started
with 2019?
With 2019.
Oh man, see, I'm not like a good youth pastor. I also do. I mean, I did more than like youth pastor things at the church, so I don't want to get like locked in as the youth pastor guy.
Okay, all right.
I'm not like a good. Yeah, I didn't do like Chubby Bunny and stuff like that.
Well, lucky for you guys, I've come pre-prepared with some really good suggestions for 2019. Okay. So here we go. My first suggestion is 20 guillotine. Get it? Because it's kind of like 19. It's a good fun.
It's a good one.
So the theme is chopping heads off.
Right, that's what guillotines are for.
Yeah, it's like this year
we're chopping fruits.
That's true. We're gonna chop some fruits or heads right up. What about
some melons, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. So maybe that one's too violent. But what about this one? 20 crime teen. So like we're doing crimes this year. Not like
a lot of property.
Not bad ones, but just like I'm gonna park here for too long.
It's a good way to get your car towed, just to have a New Year theme.
Yeah. Or here's my final suggestion. I think the one that we should go with, since this is the new Year's tradition, it's 20 John teen, talking with John Thornton Jr.
Whoa. Really junioring it.
Really junioring it up.
Yeah.
All right. Well, since it is 20 John teen, and now that's going to happen for sure, and no one can change what the year is actually going to be about, we can talk about an article you really did this year.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So recently you wrote a piece for plow.com, which is a website I didn't know existed, but now I do, and it's pretty legit.
They're rad.
Yeah.
I want to plug Plow Publishing. They're really good. They just like Mennonite Anabaptist publisher that like they just put out good stuff.
There you go. They put out good stuff.
I'll be honest, I did not know it existed until I wrote for them. So yeah, but they're awesome. They're rad. They have this little like spiritual classics series that's fantastic, and all Magnificast listeners should go buy all of those.
All right. Yeah, plow.com is cool. Well, you wrote an essay for them called A Debt to Education, and I thought it was pretty neat. I think I like this essay a lot because it has a lot of sort of like the John Thornton Jr. classics in it, like lots of like good stories, but also lots of good Christian thought on debt and spiritual formation. So it's a really good piece that's like illustrative of, I think, what you're about. A pastor talking about debt is kind of your brand now, whether you like it or not. So can you give us an elevator pitch for your article and talk to us about, like, you know, why debt is something that you're interested in, why it's something that we should think about?
The idea was that, like, so, you know, universities and higher education, especially Christian universities and higher education, are all about formation. This is like the buzzword. But in generally, formation means that our institutions are going to develop habits and relationships and like all this stuff that carries us into the future and shapes how we live, and just like stuff that we do after we leave the university. And when I was in divinity school, I remember like Duke Div was all about formation. I was like, oh, well, the most formative thing they're doing here is asking me to take out thousands of dollars of loans because I'm going to have to pay this off for forever. And I'll be in a relationship with Great Lakes. Great Lakes Student Loans is like my service provider. It will, yeah. They're pretty rad. They check in. They sent me a happy birthday message. Which yeah, my buds. And it's going to influence where I work, where I move. And this is the case for, millions of Americans. And so, but this is generally what I was trying to say was that like, this is usually off the table for people that talk about formation in university and like higher education, especially Christians, that they're like, well, no, we teach our students contemplative prayer and we go to chapel and we are in spiritual formation groups, which we had it. I think it's an accredited thing with now seminaries and divinity schools. You have to have a spiritual formation group, which is like just a bunch of people, just a bunch of strangers that you have to get together with first year and like talk about your life. And so I was just trying to stretch out like this logic of what does it mean that debt forms us in this particular way? And then how does it form us? And so there's kind of two ways that it forms us. One is retributive. And so people, when they talk about debt, especially student loan debt, they're like, oh, well, you could have gone to a different school. You could have majored in something else. You could have worked harder. You could have made all these different decisions. You could have made all these choices. And like, that's just kind of really cruel, I think, because I have so many friends that where they went to school is where they met, their partner, or where they figured out like, oh, I want to become a minister, or what I do my life, and that their lives could have gone differently. And so to say like, oh, you should have chosen differently is to say, oh, you should be a different person. And you can expand this out to other kinds of debt. Like, oh, you shouldn't have gone to the hospital and taken out medical debt. Oh, well, you're basically telling someone they shouldn't be alive, or you shouldn't have, taken out like a payday loan to pay your rent. And so there's that. And then the other part of the essay was around redemptive, which I think is the more like, another like facet of this is like, oh, well, okay, so you've gotten in debt, but that's not that big of a deal. Or you should be forgiven for that. And now like you can make a bunch of decisions to get out of debt. So like, you shouldn't feel bad for the debt that you took on. It's okay that you went to this divinity school, this seminary, this university. But now you can get out by making all of these decisions about eating at home versus eating out, or not buying Starbucks, or and all of it is trying to reduce debt to a matter of individual choice that obscures all the ways that societal structures work against us and put us in positions where we have to take out debt. So that I was trying to look at that through the language of formation at a university, because that's the language that I know, and it's the one that I saw at the university. So what does it look like to form us as debtors or choosers? I guess that would be a really long elevator ride.
Some of them are.
If we were going up like a huge elevator, that'd be my elevator pitch.
Yeah, that's how we do it on the Magnificast. We have a very big building, and we're going all the way to the top. I found the introduction about formation and university really interesting, because I teach at one, and we talk a lot about formation too. And just like, I don't know, adding that little bit of a materialist spin to it, like, you can teach kids all you want about Christianity and whatever, all that good stuff that Christian universities do, or, even the bad stuff. But you don't really think about the actual material consequences of that, like, that they have to take out tons and tons of debt, and they'll be paying it back forever. So that's even a helpful intervention, I think.
Yeah, I mean, like, you've got to pay that off. Like, it's just not, I mean, I actually don't, I mean, I don't know what happens if you just tell your loan provider, like, oh, I'm just not going to pay this. I mean, they just start taking money from wherever they can get it. But the idea that that's not formative, like you said, in the same way that Christian universities say, daily prayer is, it's absurd, right? Like, no, of course, when push comes to shove, which is what these things kind of eventually come to, you know which way you're going to go. It's going to be the having to pay something off. And we just don't recognize that as a kind of formation.
Yeah, I think it's also really useful just to kind of continue on that line of thinking. So all three of us have been through Christian higher education. Matt still works in it. I'm still going through it as a PhD student. But we're all like products of it also, one way or another, right? So like we all have student debt from that experience. And it is wild because when I think back to especially my undergraduate experience at an evangelical school, there was an office called Spiritual Formation, explicitly, and we referred to them unlovingly as a spear foe. And what was so terrible is like, so they would basically they were the cops, right? Like their job is to be the police. So if somebody hears that you like went to a party, you gotta go talk to spear foe. Somebody hears that you're like getting a little too hot with your girlfriend, gotta go talk to spear foe. But the craziest thing is like if you like didn't go to church or something, you don't like Spearfoe doesn't like wake you up on Sunday mornings. And so the ways in which they're like disciplining you is in this really particular sort of, like moral sense. But that's like a really easy thing to see when you're a student and you feel kind of like burdened by that or whatever. But I think the strength, especially of what you're doing here, is to say that like even underneath that explicit attempt at formation, there's a kind of formation that probably isn't even like registering on like the radar of people whose job it is to think about formation. And that's like the thing that they too are probably also struggling with, like student debt or, like debt from like their mortgage or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. It's like a really important kind of paradigmatic shift to be like, all right, but how is your life being formed without you knowing it to force you down certain kind of pathways?
Yeah, totally. I remember. I don't think she wasn't the head of spiritual formation. She was like she had this position like in student life at Duke Div. And it wasn't it wasn't quite where like if you fooled around with someone, you had to go like talk to us. It wasn't quite that extreme, but it was totally like her job was to, coordinate events and stuff like that on campus. But she was like a kind of older former student at Duke Div. And I remember her talking about having student debt and her using a lot of the language of formation, but not making the connection. And it's like, oh, great. But this is like actually changing where we go work and how we go do things and like our thought process. I know from enough friends of mine, especially that work in universities that are not Christian, that formation is not the language that's used, which is interesting. Like it's such a, I don't know, it's such a nebulous term that it encompasses so much in Christian universities. I'm surprised it hasn't made its way into universities that are not Christian, but yeah, it becomes this kind of way of governance or way of talking about like how you should be as a person, that to not include debt just seems absurd to me. Like it just seems silly. Like obviously this is going, at the very least, is going to be a factor in like what I do in my life. And like I said, that's true of debt from a university, credit card debt, hospital, medical debt, those sorts of things, like that we aren't incorporating that language, which is, it's one or the other, right? Either this stuff doesn't form us in particular ways, or it really, really does. And if it really does, then we ought to put it up there with morning prayer or worship or organizing or those sorts of things. And then we ought to set it alongside those things and then figure out how we're going to deal with it.
Yeah, for sure. Man, it makes me very uncomfortable to think about how I went to a Christian university, acquired a lot of debt, and now I teach at one, and my students are doing the same thing, and that's like a real self-perpetuation kind of thing. Yikes.
How do they talk about it?
Oh yeah, students, at least my students,
they know now, right?
Are pretty acutely aware of the sort of debt situation that they're in. I think, yeah, I mean, if life was precarious for me when I was an undergrad, I think it is even more so now for students today. So they definitely realize. I mean, I don't know. They understand that they will be indebted when they come out of this. I don't know if they understand sort of like what that will mean or look like, but they definitely know that it's happening. It's, a very metaphysical process at this point, I think. Well, maybe on that point, that metaphysical point about debt, or maybe even like the religious aspect of debt. You draw a few different types of categories of debt in your article. You talk about retributive debt or redemptive ideas of debt, and the whole kind of like way you're going about this conversation about like, an economic and financial sort of thing, is a really religious way. So I was wondering if you could just tell us about maybe like those religious categories you've applied to an economic situation.
Yeah. So like, well, okay. So debt's like about the future, right? You're just handing over future money. And if, we're taking, like just kind of broadly, Marxist, or I don't know, just like, you're handing over future income, you're handing over your future work. So that means you're handing over like parts of who you're going to become and what you're going to do. And like, that's what Christianity and religion has to say, is like it has to say things about like what you do and who you become. But you've already foreclosed that to some degree. And so really the retributive and the redemptive thing was really about like how we relate to one another and those of us that are in debt. And so I think I said earlier, like the retributive says basically like you should have chosen otherwise. So you made these bad choices. You went to a university that didn't give you as many scholarships as you could have earned elsewhere, but you went because that's where your friends went or your parents went, or because you just liked it there or wasn't as far away or whatever. And then that like renders you unworthy of grace from me that made better choices. I've made horrible choices in my life all the time. So I'm not like, that's not how I actually look at this, but this is the retributive view, right? Like that, if you made these bad choices, that this is what you get. And like, it's just a really poor way of relating to one another. It's really isolating. And so I guess that's maybe the religious aspect of the retributive view, is that it's a way of setting oneself up to like, I did okay. Like you could have made choices that I didn't make. Or you, oh man, hang on, back up. You didn't make the right choices, and so like it's a horrible way of relating to one another. And that in itself is religious, right? Like how we relate to one another. The redemptive view seems to have like this gloss of solidarity, that like we can get out of this. And we can actually get out of this by helping one another. And so the idea is, well, okay, so we're not to blame for the fact that we got into debt. So it's not a problem that I went to this university or the other. But we can help each other get out. And that also has a religious part of it, right? And the religious part is like, oh, well, we'll work together. But how we work together is we hold each other accountable to making like really small decisions that help get us out of debt. And those small decisions are things like, not going out to eat and eating a turkey sandwich or something like, and so the small decisions become ways that we relate to one another, that like we hold each other accountable. And again, the guilt sneaks back in, where like, who cares if someone eats a turkey sandwich? Like, I don't have any interest in making someone feel that guilty about that. But there's a whole, like, you can build this religious edifice out of it, right? That like, okay, it's not that big of a deal that you went into debt because your family had to go to the hospital because you chose this university. But like, if I see you out at the movies and then you buy popcorn and you take your whole family out and then you'll go get dinner, like, okay, what are you doing? Like, do you really want to get out of debt? Like, that mentality carries with it a kind of religion. And it's religious because it's how we relate to one another. And both are really depraved in their own way.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Or is that, yeah.
I think so. I mean, it makes sense of a few things. I'm not a theologian, as we always say in this podcast, but it makes me think of some conversations around like individual sin versus corporate sin as well. And like, I don't know, how Christians especially have kind of a hard time like imagining guilt that spreads across like a group of people or a whole systemic society, even though there are like plenty of good biblical or theological reasons to like talk about something like that. And I think that's something that your article does really well, is to say that like all individual choices aside, like we all live within a whole society that compels you in certain directions or compels you to do or act or think or feel certain things, right? I think that, especially that language of formation, the way that you kind of mobilize formation as a like almost materialist trope or something is really instructive. I mean, do you think there's kind of like a theological analog to something like that, like this idea of having a recognition of these collective systematic structural problems that might lend someone to, I don't know, make a certain choice or feel compelled to make a certain choice, or maybe even feel stuck without the ability to make certain choices. What would be a kind of like theological term or theological way of talking about that, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that we're creatures, like, is a language that, I mean, we're subject to forces outside our control. And one of those is God. Oh, I think I said this on the last time I was on. And so now I'm backtracking, but I think that's right. Like the idea that each of these, the retributive and the redemptive way of looking at debt says like, well, no, you can make yourself. And what we know is that we can't individually make, like, we're not self-made. I think there's something to be said for independence and freedom with one another. But the way that debt locates that in a kind of calculable formation is just wrong, especially down to like a number, right? Like, oh, you can, if part of making yourself or being yourself is moving to this place and you can't move to that place because you owe this much money and that's going to hinder you from that, then like you're subject to something else. But like but who are we subject to when we're indebted, right? Like, it's one thing to be subject to God that you believe ultimately has, your good in mind and is working for it. It's another thing to be subject to, Great Lakes student loan servicers or whatever. I don't know, they probably don't have my good in mind, if I had to guess.
But like they probably think they do, right? Like they think that like you came to them to get money to invest in your own future. Like that's the ideology that's present. That you're getting money so that you can get a degree that will allow you to make enough money to pay back the money you took, plus like plenty enough to have like a really good life or whatever.
Oh yeah, for sure. They they have no idea that I'm not really crushing it right now. They will in like a month when I have to call and get them to like give me an extra month or two. But yeah, but there's no real relationship. And so like, to the kind of theological point, like the idea that we can know God and God can know us is very different than this massive corporation that, I don't know, like they don't, there's no humane or like personal, oh man, I don't want to say personal relationship because like I don't know what I think about a personal relationship with God. But you know what I'm saying? Like that there is a sense in which God knows us, and to be subject to God is a different thing, hopefully, than to be subject to this sort of creation of people. And so, I think the sort of theological alternative is to be subject to like an alternative community that's governed or works by like different rules.
I think that's a really good point. That Great Lakes is very different than God. I mean, they did send you a birthday card, which I guess is nice, but it's different.
Yeah, because God didn't.
Yeah, seriously.
Still waiting. 32 years in, still waiting.
I mean, Great Lakes also sold my student loans off to some other company. So, like, and they didn't even ask me. So, like, that's not God behavior for sure.
Right.
I guess. I don't know. Anyways, circling back around something you said a few minutes ago, when you were kind of going through the retributive and redemptive views of debt, there's like some really funny parts of your article. There's this whole thing. I mean, if y'all haven't read it, you should go out there and go to plow.com and read John Thornton Jr.'s article on debt. But there's a funny part in the article where you're kind of talking about this financial education seminar you were at, which is like, the funniest thing I can actually imagine.
Yeah, it was not great.
It seems like a real bad time. Anyways,
the thing with like financial education is like the whole point is like just have more money.
Yeah,
like it would all be good. Like if I just had more money,
that's the education. Is that like you're too poor?
You should just have more money.
Yeah.
Like that would be, yeah.
Well, there's one part of the article where you're talking about like, how people can hope to alleviate their economic suffering by like, eating a peanut butter sandwich at home rather than going out to the Mexican restaurant, or, you got to just buy some cheaper toilet paper, which is like, it's like,
but we talked about that for like 20 minutes.
Yeah. That's so sad to me. It's really sad. Well, so you went on to know...
yeah, and like they get kind of the editor kind of cut it from the piece, probably rightfully so. But the joke that I made was like we should be doing the medical calculations of like if you're only eating peanut butter and wiping your ass with cheap toilet paper. But there's going to be some medical costs. Like this is like that's like this. Surely we need to factor this into our financial picture.
That is not living your best life now.
It's not great. It's not good.
Or later.
Yeah, or later.
Yeah.
Well, so you went on.
I had a buddy who like brought up if you're only eating peanut butter, at the very least admit like that's what they did in the Depression. like at least admit that's where we are.
Damn, can you imagine though? You graduate from Financial Peace University or whatever, and then you just got to eat peanut butter. Dave Ramsey, no. Well, so you go on to make the point, and I think a pretty good point is that like you cited some sources, so that's good. But people aren't spending more money on consumer goods than they have in the past. It's just that stuff is more expensive now. And that seems to be true, especially with regards to the university. But it's such an interesting thing that, like, I mean, things really haven't changed. It's not like people are living these crazy lifestyles they haven't in the past. It's just that things have become, more expensive in some different ways. But we can't understand that somehow. There's like a real false consciousness where we think that, like, we're just spending too much money on toilet paper rather than the entire economic system is stacked against us. So I wonder what you might say, like, what keeps people from understanding how shallow we understand, what keeps people from, like, seeing that, like, we have this, like, really shallow and narrow understanding of our economic situation, and, like, why can't we see past this, like, buying cheap toilet paper strategy?
Oof. Well, one, I guess the question is, like, who is the we there? Like, I find that most people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, like, get this. It was fascinating at that. So for those that haven't read the essay, so I went to, like, a 2-day thing where I got a grant for $10,000. It was the coolest, like, amazing. Like, I literally just held a check for $10,000. But, like, part of it was this kind of 2-day thing where we talked about financial literacy and financial education. And it was a bunch of ministers, and then all of us brought someone from our congregation. And I was the only one that did. I didn't put it in the article, but, like, both of my congregants backed out. So I'm, like, the only guy breaking the rules. But what was interesting, like, at this thing, in like 2 days, so there's like 15 ministers, 15 congregants. What was really interesting was a lot of the congregants were older because they could take off on, like, a Tuesday, Wednesday and go to this thing. And so many of them were like, I never got this kind of education. But they recognized that they just basically retired fine. And so then they had to project backwards. So if they're thinking, this kind of financial literacy education is necessary, and I didn't get it, but I retired fine, how would I have learned these things? So they all talked about, like, well, our parents just raised us this way to, like, think about money. And so I think there's just a lot of, like retroactive, like, looking back and going, oh, well, I came out okay, but I didn't get this kind of education. So how did that happen? Well, someone must have told it to me at some point, rather than, well, no, wages were good, you were white, you were a certain age, like, the economy worked in a certain way. And that's something I have to admit, I have no idea how to communicate to anybody to figure that out. But it was awesome. It was so funny. That, oh yeah, I remember when we were growing up, and, like, our parents, they brought out, like, a little, what's the thing where you, like, slide the beads back and forth? Like, they were like, that's the abacus. They were like, our parents brought out an abacus, and we all learned how to budget our money. It's like, no, you didn't. You just grew up with, like, unions and a pension. Like, that's like, that's, yeah. So I don't know what that looks like to make people aware of that, but that's where I saw that most clearly, was like a kind of misrecognition or failure to recognize that economic forces do shape our lives.
All right, so you're a pastor at a church, right? And all these, like, people that you interact with on a daily basis have to also interact with the way in which we live in a society formed by debt. So, like, how do you pastorally kind of respond to, like, people who are freaked out about that? I guess that's, like, the hardest question, like, the one that I also struggle with. Like, how do you, I don't know, meet someone there in a way that's compassionate and also, like, tries to sort of guide them in some sort of direction or whatever?
Like, you're asking, like, what do I do with, like, congregants that are already recognizing these things?
Yeah, like, I don't know, say you have, like, a student who, like, goes to college and comes back, or like is planning on going to college, and they're already sort of like wringing their hands about the debt situation that they're in or going to be in.
Yeah, I think some of it's just acknowledging, like, yeah, this isn't your fault. Like, there's literally nothing you could have done, and that is, I mean, we're like 3 generations into like, I mean, we're thousands of years, but definitely 3 generations in of like people being told and people being raised and informed to think like, oh, well, if you work hard and do X, Y, and Z, like this will work out. And we're just on the cusp of seeing that break down. My friend Jess, who graduated high school, I guess the year after I did, had this great line where she was like, this was like a year or 2 ago. She was like, yeah, we were like the last ones that they told, if you work hard, things will work out. And it wasn't a total lie in that, like, the people saying it just didn't, like, they couldn't have known. I graduated high school in 2005. Like, they couldn't have known that, like, what was going to happen, right? But at this point, like, we know it's not going to work out. Like, it's just not. And so I think acknowledging that is to me incredibly pastoral, though there's this way where like the pastoral and the, you know, like quote unquote prophetic, which the pastoral usually means making people feel good, and the prophetic means making them feel uncomfortable, but it depends on how rich they are that actually like which one applies. It's really pastoral to tell someone that, like, you know, the mighty will be cast down and you're going to be okay. Depending on where they are. And, yeah, so I think, I don't know, acknowledging where people are in a way that builds solidarity. Was it, Fred Moten? Have you ever read The Undercommons?
Mm-hmm.
You ever read that book? Yeah, Fred Moten has this great line. I guess I don't know, it's just his, but it's pretty clearly his. That was it the coalition emerges from the recognition that this shit's killing you too,
right?
No matter how much more slowly, you stupid motherfucker. Which is,
yeah, is a good line.
Which I don't know if I can. Yeah, you know, beep. But that idea that, like, when someone comes to you and they're like, oh, like, I'm in debt and I'm screwed up, or they say like I'm screwed up because that's what they expect church to say, or a church or a pastor. Much of the financial literacy thing that I wrote about was about fixing us in terms of money. And I was just like, well, what if we're not screwed up? What if that's if the problem isn't us being screwed up? Like, what if we're actually okay? And that we deserve better than this. And like, no one's actually saying that. There's no one out there I don't see many churches saying it.
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful way of putting it, and also like kind of a really Christian way of putting it too. That yeah, recognizing the worth of people and that their decisions don't ultimately define them, and that there's some kind of way out, right? Like, I
don't know if there's a way out. That's the problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, probably not. Well, sorry, it's 20. It's
we can get to that, but
it's the beginning of 2019, and there's definitely a way out at this point in the year. Maybe at the end of 2019, I won't feel the same way. But there's like really a clearly okay. Sorry, we're talking about debt in this like really religious way, and I think it actually helps kind of understand the situation a little bit better. Like, I mean, like, what better sort of allegory for this type of thinking about debt than just like damnation or devil or like evil? And what better way of thinking about like kind of getting out of it as grace? So
totally.
You in your article you pull out a lot of political theology with regards to Adam Kotsko's new book. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that, the ways that you define and use grace and other figures like the devil with regards to debt.
Yeah, so Adam Kotsko, who anyone who's listening to this should follow him on Twitter and check out read his book and his blog. And so I read his book, Neoliberalism's Demons. It's basically about the way that capitalism reduces the political theology of capitalism reduces everything to an individual choice in such a way that it gets the system off the hook. And he compares this to the theological story of the devil. So the idea is, the devil, this is like real Christian tradition. The devil is created with free will, but the moment the devil is created, that free will rebels against God in such a way that even though God knew the devil would rebel, and the devil did rebel and then created evil, God is not on the hook for creating the devil. And so I was trying to apply this basically to student debt, though it applies in a myriad of ways. And so, again, what we were talking about. So any student who has student debt could have chosen otherwise, chosen to go to a different school, chosen to work harder. So there's like this is part of like the theological structure of it. And so it's a fantastic book, and it really helps show the way that like choice has worked its way into a way to get not just the system off the hook, but also people. So this, I'll give you an example. At the church I was most recently working at, we had someone that we were helping with our benevolence fund. And benevolence fund, we can just kind of give to anybody. And we were helping this guy out with some rent and some, basic payments. And I had someone at the church who said, well, why don't we set up some, they weren't even stipulations, but things he can choose to do to make his life better. And look for a job, resume, this sort of thing. And if he doesn't, then we'll cut off the help. And where Costco's book was really helpful was if you're looking at it in a way where the whole purpose of giving people choice is not so much that they actually choose the right thing, but to alleviate you of any responsibility. I was just like, well, okay, look, here's the thing. Let's either just help this guy or not. And if we don't want to, then let's just say we don't want to, and let's just not. But let's not set up the situation that we know he basically isn't going to be able to fulfill, that then alleviates us of our duties to help him. And I think the same thing happens with debt, right? To maybe a lesser degree, but let's set it up to where if they do this class or they do this thing, then we'll help them. But the thing you're setting them up to do, they're probably not going to be able to do. And so grace would just be, grace would be, I'm going to help no matter what. That doesn't matter. It full stop. And so Costco's book I found to be really helpful, kind of practical theology in that way. Does that make sense, or is that?
Yeah, like how Jesus doesn't give people fish and then he's like, now let me know how you're portioning this out for the rest of the week.
Yeah, or even check it right, or even check in beforehand, or set someone up. Generally the people Jesus sets up to potentially fail are rich people. Those are the ones he actually gives stuff to do, and they're like, oh, no, I really can't handle that. And they're like, oh, okay, well, see ya. The poor people, he's just like, hey, here's everything you need.
Well, there's a lot more that we could talk about in your article, especially you have a lot to say about formation, but also counter formation, and I think that we could probably have done like a whole episode on something like that. But I'm also concerned because we haven't really settled the 2019 theme for this year, and I just feel like we can't post this episode without solving this problem. So I want to pull us back around to that. Anything really jump out just as we've been talking? I mean, we need to name it, and we also need some kind of call to action to accompany it. I'm not really sure exactly where we could go. I was just thinking of things that rhyme with 19. 20 caffeine, who knows? Getting a little excited about that. 20 black bean, maybe people want to go vegetarian. 20 between, we could just sort of give up, go between 2018 and 2020 and just check in. But I thought we would be doing a disservice if we didn't round out this conversation, at least giving it another try.
I do like 20 black bean. That's good. Let's get down on some of those veggie burgers. 20 black bean, eat a veggie burger. That's the sort of theme for this year.
It is a tangible goal.
Doing it. Yeah,
but it's doable. Like we can all do that.
It's a very materialist.
You'd be helping the planet by making this individual choice.
Right. Yeah, that's what we all need.
What else we got here? All right. We're gonna have to pull out the big guns. Just go to rhymezone.com. Where everyone goes when they're looking for good rhymes. Let's see, 20 canteen. Take a sip of that holy water. What else we got here? 20 porcine. Don't be a pig this year.
Not like don't be a capitalist pig.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Or a cop.
Either one. 20 jorts teen. Get jorts.
Getting Jordy.
20 jorts teen really doing it. Actually, kind of.
No, we messed up. It should have been 2014. We're too late.
We are too late.
Vine teen? 20 vine teen?
Yeah, 20 vine teen's not bad because there's a real Christian kind of metaphor going on there. All right, what can we do with that? 20 vine teen, bear that fruit.
Ooh.
Yep, done. Nailed it. That's it. 20 vine teen, bear the fruit.
Oh gosh, that's gotta be in someone's sermon next week, right? Like that's happening.
All right, Matt, you want to take us home?
Hang on, I'm trying to think of something to do. Dang, I'm too distracted by all these rhymes, Dean. You've overloaded my brain with rhyme.
20 rhymes, Dean.
Ooh.
Can't stop doing it.
We should have done some Dean puns. 29 Deans. There's 9 Deans out here. Find out which one's the real one.
Ask me something that only I would know.
John, thanks so much for coming on the podcast and talking to us about all these things. Thanks for giving us a good way to think about debt so that we can bear that good fruit. Get the wine in the proper wine skins. I can never remember which one it is. You put old wine and new wine skins, or new wine and old wine skins. I don't remember which one, but you're going to help us do it. Yeah. Getting the wines into the proper skins in this next year. Anyways, thanks.
Wines in the skins.
Wines in the skins, bro. All right.
That's my favorite way to play basketball.
Are you wines or skins?
Yeah, wines versus skins. You have to douse yourself just in like a giant vat of wine till your skin is completely stained to be on the wine team.
Sweet bear wine. Cool, John. Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon. That would be a really cool thing for you to do. You can also follow us on Twitter. We got a Facebook group. We got a Facebook page, but you know what? The Facebook page doesn't really do anything, so just unlike that one right away. That's the first time a podcast ever told you to unlike a page, I bet. Cool. Well, it's the end. Well, it's the beginning of a new year, so start off right and bear all that good fruit. That's all I'm trying to say here. Cool. Thanks to Amari Armstrong for our really good intro music, and also thanks to Theological Spoon for that really good outro music. We'll see you next time.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might mind if you leave too soon. So come on now, it's still early. Beside, what else are you gonna do? As we kissed in the alley by the Michigan Theater, fall snow was glowing in the lights of the downtown. Saw a spark in your eyes, I just spoke it. Said we're gonna turn this whole place upside down. Then you said, my dear, do you really mean this? I said, I only know what I feel right now. I said, poet lies.